Hi everyone, welcome to Handing the Shame Back, a channel dedicated to the amazing survivors across the world of child sexual abuse. We know it's big, we know the impact is far-reaching and on so many levels. Every week I bring you a wonderful survivor guest who shares their story with the hope that it may reach you and help you in some way understand more of your own journey. It takes a lot of courage to come on the show, and I'm always grateful to those amazing survivors who feel they can. But just so you know, if you're not there yet, that's okay. We are where we need to be. I need to start again, as usual, with a trigger warning because the content is, by its very nature and name, child sexual abuse. So if for any reason whatsoever you feel triggered or unsafe, please do stop watching, go to the show notes below, and you'll be directed for resource and support. So my great honour today to introduce to you Brinn Langdale, all the way from California. She is, in no certain order, of course, but she is a therapist, speaker, and writer. She brings a lot to the survivor space, and welcome to the show, Brinn.
Thank you, Gloria. I'm really honored to be here and thank you for having me.
Oh, it's so wonderful to hear stories. It always makes me feel very humbled, actually. So I, in this first part of the interview, Brinn, we tend to look at, what is your history of child sexual abuse, just as much or as little as you're comfortable to share with us today.
Yeah. Thank you for giving me space to share and thank you for everybody who's watching and listening out there. So, for me, um, basically my life turned upside down when I turned 18. I was about to graduate from high school, and that's when everything came out. My oldest brother, he actually took me out to dinner to ask me a specific question. He had somebody in his life who had been sexually abused by one of her older brothers, and she asked him to ask me if that was happening to me by my other brother. So I know that's a lot of brothers and people. So my oldest brother took me out to dinner and asked me, "Hey, has anything weird ever happened? Anything like that?" And I just broke down crying and don't think he quite knew the severity of the question that he asked, but just that question and having that awareness, it completely changed my life. Changed our whole family. And that's when I started admitting to myself for the first time that I had been abused. And, but I didn't feel like somebody who had been abused. I came from a loving home and, we had so many opportunities and privileges. And so my brother is the closest one in age to me. He and I had been best friends. We were very well connected to each other. And he started molesting me when I was about 4 years old. And he was about 6.5, almost 7. And that continued throughout my entire childhood, all the way until I was 15 and a half was the first time I ever said no. And when I did say no, it stopped. Um, and it still didn't sink in what was happening. It still wasn't, I wasn't full of rage. I didn't want to tell my parents. There was nothing really changed. I was very much compartmentalized. I lived this kind of double life, is how I think about it. Um, Things would happen with him, and then I would just, go to the family dinner table. It just was this double life is the best way to call it. And so when I was 18, it really felt like, an entire like a like a like a veil had been lifted. from my eyes to really see. And so that's why everything changed. I never really went home after that. I went to my oldest brother's house and I slept on his couch. And actually I did go home. I went home for about 2 weeks and I have no memory of it whatsoever. There is not a single memory that I have of going back into that house and living with him, and my mom. But I did. That's kind of what happened.
Do you think, and look, thank you so much for your courage, because that's huge, to have held on to all of that and kept it hidden from yourself in a way, living the double life. Just the cost to you, I'm just feeling the cost to you of that. Wow.
Yeah, thank you. It was a big cost because it came out in so many different ways. Like I was essentially, if you were to kind of like write it all down, I was like a poster child for trauma. But nobody knew what to look for. From a very young age, let's see, I was getting stomach aches constantly. I was refusing to go to school. I started sucking my thumb when I was in first grade. So this wasn't something that I had done for a long time, but I started sucking my thumb in first grade. Like that is, as I am now a licensed therapist, and so I know that those are tell signs. But at the time, my parents, they thought it was immaturity. And on some level, okay, but it wasn't they noticed it, they saw something was going on, but they just thought I was, immature, young for my age kind of thing.
So let me ask you, you say first grade, is that 6 years old over in the States? Is that considered first grade, or are you 5?
Yeah, well, I started kindergarten when I was 4, and so the time we're talking about, I was 5. So I
Yeah.
was going into first grade, summer going into first grade. So I was 5 at the time.
So, Bryn, this is really powerful, and you've just coined something that, oh, hello, beautiful survivors watching, that they will be able to relate to as well, because regression, as we know, is one of the hallmarks, or can be a significant sign of a child who is being sexually abused, because we know thumb sucking usually starts from infancy and ends by about 2.5 to 3 years of age. So, wow. So you had the stomach aches, you had the regression with the thumb sucking, you had refusing to go to school. When you,
Yeah.
okay, and just to clarify, when you went back, because we're going to go down lots of roads here, but you're doing great, by the way. Um, when you went back for those 2 weeks, are you feeling that something may have happened at that time?
Um, no.
No.
I don't. I just think my body and brain could not handle being in the space with him, knowing what had happened. Because before, I didn't know what happened. I mean, I did, like, it was there, but a lot of my memories had been either blocked out or like fuzzy.
Yes.
And so, like, I definitely knew things were happening, but it wasn't in the forefront of my brain. And he and I actually, about a month prior to all this happening when I was 18, he asked me about it. He brought it up to me.
Your abusing brother? Or
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, at the time he was addicted to heroin at the time. And he had been kind of living on the streets, and my mom brought him home to try to rehab him, and which is I do not recommend bringing that into your home where your daughter is and where she's trying to finish school. And I was the captain of my water polo team, and I was, I was going for college and all this stuff. And so he came home, he was on heroin, he was going through withdrawals, and I also I took him to buy drugs. He asked me to drive him and I did. I knew where I was taking him. And I was still under his spell. Like, he was the kind of person, he said jump, I said how high. Like, that's just the type of power dynamic we had. And so I was driving him to go buy drugs, and he brought it up and he said, "Hey, what went on when we were younger? Did that like affect you at all?" And I was like, "Nope, I'm fine. I'm just mad at you for doing drugs and for wasting your talent." He's an extremely talented musician and singer and dancer, and had totally thrown away his career. And I was like, "No, I'm just mad at you for doing drugs. Like, that stuff, no, it didn't bother me at all." And that's where I was. And so when everything came out, that was my story. That was like my story, and I'm sticking to it. Like, I'm fine. I'm a good student. I'm a top athlete. I'm a leader. I've had relationships. Like, I'm good. I'm about to leave for college and leave all this behind me. Um and that was my reality. But it was also a veil. It was a disguise also. Um, my dad, when he found out about it, immediately got me into therapy, and he told me I could come live with him. And that felt safe. So I felt a little, I still went to my job after school at the coffee shop, and but I was self-medicating. I was smoking weed constantly before school, after work. And I would basically like go to school, go to work, hang out with my friends. Nobody knew, like none of my friends knew. So I was still kind of living this like life that was very much like protecting me, like my mind was protecting me, my body was protecting me, while I was trying to make sense of what was happening too.
Yeah, and look, I understand what you're saying, and again, it's just you're a bit of a gold mine, really, Bryn. So thank you. Lots of great learning for our survivors watching. You talked earlier about being under his control, and all I can say to that is, and for survivors watching, give yourself some grace. You were conditioned, you were targeted, you were groomed to become this person. And what we do, we know what dissociation is. We know that we block in order to protect our mind. During those years and those times, you had to do that to survive. So, yes, you knew what you were doing when you took him to buy the drugs, but I'm going to suggest to you that actually you were much younger and still being the conditioned survivor, victim that you were at that time. And I think sometimes that can be a real challenge for people who aren't survivors to understand that, even if as a teenager you were still experiencing that, you had no more power over that than you did from the age it first began. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I can definitely see what you're saying, because as time went on, that hold remained into my 20s, almost until I was 30. I ended up forgiving him right before I turned 30, which I'm sure we'll get into. Um, but up until that point, he had so much power over me.
Yeah,
Like him, sending me a text message could completely spin me out for days. Or, this one time we were at a family gathering, And I had told him, like, we can go, but don't talk to me. And he followed me out the door and told me, like, I want to talk to you. And I said, okay. Like, there was no adult present in myself at that time. I was entirely in my inner child, my little girl, and
Yes.
my younger self.
Yeah.
And I walked all the way down the stairs through the apartment complex, like to my car with him talking to me. I have no idea what he said. I have no clue what he said when he was talking to me because I was so in that survival state. And this is in my late 20s.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting? Because this is something survivors often say. I knew what was happening. Why couldn't I, at 19 or 23 or even 30
Mhm.
of age, have stood back in my own power? And again, I just want to remind the audience as we start to close part one. The age the abuse happens, should it continue, is the age you stay when in the presence of that person.
Yeah.
So, Bryn, any kind of final thoughts on this just as we're going to close out?
Just that, be thinking about it as, part 1,
Yeah,
right? Thinking about it as like the childhood and, the reveal and all of that. Those were some excruciatingly hard times, like I was dealing with, suicidal ideation at times and eating disorders and, all sorts of self-harming substances and just to talk to the people that also might be in those places, there is absolute hope for things to change, like 100%. And, knowing where I've been and, like how dark it has been, and knowing where I am now and the journey that I've taken to get here, like I am incredibly grateful for my life. And at some point, have become grateful for all of the experiences in my life. But that's just me, that doesn't have to happen with everybody. But know that healing and hope and all of that, those can be really scary ideas. Like, what does healing even mean? Or what, does that mean I'm going to find something I don't like, or it was my fault, or, something like that. And I am just really just want to say, like, that's not what we find. What we find is a scared little kid who just wants to be loved and comforted. And that healing of that little kid will dramatically change your life. And there is 100% hope for that to happen. So that's really the message I want to share.
maybe you should take the host chair. So stay right there, Bryn. This ends our part one team, and you can already see the gift. You can already see what Bryn brings to us today, and even though we all have an experience of child sexual abuse, otherwise you wouldn't be watching this. It's interesting how it impacts us, and what I love about the many things that Bryn said, but one in particular is you're just the scared little kid who just wants to be loved and
Yep.
comforted. And never forget that on your journey, beautiful ones. So, as always, I see you, I stand beside you, and I believe you.